Hello, this is David Clive Price, and you're so welcome to the Asia Business Network Expert Series. Coming up today, we're going to talk about corporate cultural diplomacy and how important it is to achieve success in Asia business. And we have a great guest in the experts chair today. It is Grant Hall. Grant is the founder of a new business called League Cultural Diplomacy, an international event management and consulting firm that specializes in corporate cultural diplomacy. Grant is from Adelaide, South Australia, but is currently based in a seaside town in Vietnam. Grant has been managing arts and cultural events for over 20 years and has coordinated hundreds of events, including orchestral concert tours and critically acclaimed arts festivals. He has lived and worked in Australia, Northern Ireland, Canada and Vietnam, and now manages events that help organizations build relationships, trust, and ultimately influence abroad or across cultures. So we're thrilled to have him here today. Grant, welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the opportunity to chat.
And it's great to have you. So let's start off with a question that many listeners will want to know. What perhaps is the heart of your business? What exactly is corporate cultural diplomacy?
Well, perhaps I'll start with telling you a little bit about my business and what I do, and that will give you a good idea of what corporate cultural diplomacy actually is. So as you mentioned, David, my business is called League Cultural Diplomacy, and it's an international event management and consulting firm that specialises in corporate cultural diplomacy, or CCD as it's otherwise known. And we help our clients build relationships, trust and influence abroad through cultural events or other creative initiatives. So for example, events might include music, dance or theatre performances, festivals, films, art exhibitions or sports contests or publications, or really anything to do with culture. We can organise, and we take quite a broad understanding of what culture can be. So, you know, cooking displays, gardening events, you name it, we can do it. And used correctly and strategically, CCD can be used to build relationships and really bring about some excellent business outcomes. And it's particularly useful in new markets, new or foreign markets. So let me explain a little bit more about what CCD is. Corporate cultural diplomacy, it's a tool to manage international business relationships and gain influence. Now, most people will be aware that governments have used cultural diplomacy for hundreds of years to further their national interests abroad.
Yes.
So quite often that's done through embassies that arrange cultural events, like film festivals are quite popular, theatre ensemble visits are popular. And what corporate cultural diplomacy does is it puts those same tools for gaining influence into the hands of organisations or people that want to advance their corporate objectives overseas or across cultures. So I might explain it a little bit further, in that many people, quite often I'm asked, what's the difference between corporate cultural diplomacy and corporate social responsibility? And what I point to is that corporate cultural diplomacy has what I call the 5 magic ingredients. So if we take the word magic, corporate cultural diplomacy meets corporate objectives. So the letter M meets corporate objectives. Letter A, abroad or across cultures. So that can mean overseas or in new markets or foreign markets, can mean across the border. Can also mean across cultures. So it might mean within your own country, but perhaps you want to develop excellent relationships with perhaps a minority group or an indigenous group. It can also mean across cultures within your workplace. If you've got if your corporation is large enough that it spans several different countries and you have a diverse range of people from different cultures, corporate cultural diplomacy can help galvanise the corporate culture of your organisation.
So So it's a
Yes,
reflection of in a way, it's related to what the politicians call soft power, in the
it's
sense of
very much
influencing.
related.
Yes, but it's a
Yes,
corporate version of it,
that's right.
and it's a way to project your brand, I guess, and to build relationships and give a sense of what your corporation or your brand or your product is about as well, and I guess to plug into networks and abroad, overseas, across cultures, and to contribute to the greater cultural understanding of the nations of the world too.
Well, that's absolutely correct. Um, there's a multitude of benefits for delivering corporate cultural diplomacy. At the heart of it is the relationships.
Mm,
It's all about relationships, relationships, relationships,
right.
and of course, very much being able to deliver things like delivering, improving your brand awareness
Yes.
is almost a spin-off effect. And in my blog, which is at wherewordsfailblog.com, I have a particular post which provides about 24 reasons
Right.
why corporations should use corporate cultural diplomacy. And if I continue on with the magic,
Yes.
the five magic ingredients, then the next letter is G, and this is related. It gains influence
Gain.
and
Yeah.
gains influence,
Oh.
and influence ultimately stems from, first of all, you build the relationships, and then you have the trust, and then the influence.
Yes.
For the letter I, it's initiative driven.
Yes.
So you have a conduit for your cultural diplomacy project. So that can be an event or a series of different events. And finally, C, it's culturally centered. So it needs to have an aspect of culture, be that music or dance or gardening. And again, you take quite a broad view of that. So the magic five ingredients, if I put it all together, it meets corporate cultural diplomacy, meets corporate objectives, are broader across cultures, gains influence, it's initiative driven and culturally centered.
So, who can use corporate cultural diplomacy? Who are the? It's not often. Is it often seen on the agendas of or in the departments of companies in the same way that CSR is, or is it something that is specially chosen by certain companies in certain sectors? Just to give us a sense of who uses CCD, as you call it.
Sure. Now, it's used more widely than one might think.
Right.
When I was working in Perth, Western Australia, I was privy to see quite a lot of what the large mining companies did in Western Australia to gain influence, and a lot of that was culturally based. And the reason for that was because in Western Australia, to build a mine quite often, or to dig a mine, quite often a mining company will have to negotiate terms to dig that mine or explore for materials on Indigenous owned land. So they would need to negotiate with Indigenous groups and try to find some points of agreement. And quite often, to help build those important relationships, they would support the Indigenous organisations through supporting their cultural centres and their artists and the like.
Yes.
So that it's quite common, but it's not always spoken about as a it's not always in the newspapers, so to speak.
Yes.
And a lot of it falls under corporate social responsibility. There is a lot in common between
Right.
corporate cultural diplomacy and corporate social responsibility. I guess the main points of difference is that it's corporate cultural diplomacy is always culturally centered, and it is ultimately there to build influence through relationships and trust building.
Right.
So perhaps
sorry, carry on.
So to come back to your question about who can use it, multinational businesses can use it, governments, sporting teams,
Right.
defence forces, essentially any person or organisation wanting to build corporate relationships with key people or groups abroad or across cultures can benefit from CCD.
Can you give us a few other examples of it in action, as it were, in Asia, which I think would interest our listeners, since you're based in Vietnam, you're from Australia. So how does it work in Asia?
Well, I've been speaking in preparation for launching Lead Cultural Diplomacy with a large number of organisations, mostly Australian organisations, but others as well that are doing business in Asia.
Yeah.
I remember one company that I've been talking to recently. They're an exporting company from Australia, and after lengthy negotiations, they were delighted to get some of their product to a port in China.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's where the product still is.
Oh.
For whatever reason, it hasn't managed to get from the port where the ship unloaded it to the point of sale.
Right.
So there's obviously a problem there with the distributors and that point of connection in the supply chain.
Yeah.
So what we've been talking about is it's been identified, obviously, that there's a problem with the relationships that they have in that point of the supply chain. So what we're working together on doing is organising some cultural diplomacy initiatives that will help them build those key relationships at that point in the supply chain.
Ah, I see. So sorry, Grant, carry on.
So CCD can be used to solve some very serious business problems. It's not just cultural problems that it can obvious cultural problems, but quite often serious straight down the line business problems can be solved by corporate cultural diplomacy.
So it's not simply soft influence, as it were, but it's actually a hard business tool. It's a method that you can approach to build what are more difficult things to quantify, such as relationships, but you can use this form of diplomacy to enhance your relationships. Would you say it's useful for other ways of doing business in Asia? There's building relationships. You mentioned this particular example.
Yes.
Are there other CCD, corporate cultural diplomacy, methods or examples of the way it's used in Asia across culture, in addition to relationships?
Certainly, I could talk to you about an initiative that is being planned between the Western Australian government and a government in China, and it's an initiative between two orchestras, the China Philharmonic Orchestra and the West Australian Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah.
Now the project was launched by the Australian China Business Council, and it's been backed by business leaders from both Shanghai and Perth, which is the capital of Western Australia. And it's being used as a way to foster beneficial trade relationships between the two countries.
Right.
So, sure, it's an orchestral event, but alongside the orchestral event will be trade delegation aspects, different ways of involving forging person-to-person links, business-to-business links, even government-to-government links, using that common ground of orchestral concerts and orchestral events as a way to bring people together as kind of a background.
Right. As so bringing people together. I like that. Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
It's very much to do with that, isn't it? It's getting people attuned to each other's cultures and the common points of those cultures, I guess, in the way that you put on events or concerts. It's creating trust, isn't it?
It's absolutely building trust.
Yeah.
And it gives businesses a heightened ability to navigate complex cultural terrain, through immersive cultural learning experience.
Right.
Often that exceed those that are provided, in a book. The immersive experience of relating with people from a different culture, but within a shared and mutually enjoyable
Yes.
environment. You know, it also gives your business really advantageous insights into your target market.
Yeah.
You know, you can build good relationships so that unintentional cultural faux pas won't be misconstrued as rudeness or indications of bad intentions.
Yes, so it's all the essentials really of building good business in Asia, which is based so much on relationships and the personal. As we all know, our listeners will also know, it's an essential part of that. It sounds like by using strictly cultural means this time. I mean, like you say, concerts and other arts events. In order to build up that atmosphere of trust and understanding of the way things are done.
Yes.
So it's mutual trust.
You build a reservoir of trust that will
Yeah.
enable your business relationships to survive bumpy negotiations and cultural differences. And it also involves one thing that I like about the West Australian Shanghai orchestral program is the reciprocity aspects of it, which is, you know, so important in many Asian, particularly Asian countries, is that you can give something, they can give something,
Yes.
you know, and
Yes.
it meets some of
And that very much
those,
plugs into the way business relationships are formed successfully in Asia. Is this mutual obligation? It's not simply based on the transaction or the deal or the contract, but very
That's
much
right.
on the long-term relationship and commitment. And so this is another very important way that you can build those relationships. And mutual obligation, reciprocity, as you put it. Yes.
Yes, that's exactly right.
What advice would you have for organisations seeking to use corporate cultural diplomacy in Asia?
Look, you need to do your homework,
Mm,
and you need to plan strategically.
right.
You know, it sounds very good that you might want to put on a dance performance to solve a problem in distribution,
Mm.
but, you know, what's the link? You can't just put on
Yeah.
an event and hope people will turn up and everything will be rosy because you've put on an arts event,
Yes.
for example. You need to know who you need to influence. What are the ways that you can help build those important relationships?
Yes.
It's no point spending $1 million on an orchestral event if the people that you want to come don't show up. So what are you going to do to ensure that your initiative helps build the relationships with the right people?
Yes.
So do your homework and plan strategically. That's probably number one.
Right.
I think. I think it's important to have the right people there to deliver the initiative. If you have a project manager or whatever, you know, they need to have a good understanding of both the cultural aspects of it and of the hard side business aspects of it.
Right.
You need to have your cultural competencies under control.
Yes.
So, you know, you need to have listened to your Clive Price podcasts and,
yes, hopefully, yes.
read the right books and,
yes.
you know know the local business protocols to put
yes.
your best foot forward, which
yeah.
is important.
So
you need to put in an effort at an interpersonal level. You can't just organise a series of initiatives or events and hope they'll look for themselves. You still need to put in an effort and meet people and talk to people, and you know it's not a shortcut.
Right.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's not a shortcut.
No.
So,
And you need to involve your most senior people.
right.
That I think that's very important. You know, especially in Asia where seniority is important, rank is important. You know, if you're going to produce a cultural diplomacy event, you know, it's best to have your highest ranking people there, and you know, I think that will be appreciated. So that's probably my main advice.
Right.
If you can't do that, speak to me. Get in touch with me, and
Yes.
I can either advise you on how to do this, or I can manage the event on your behalf for you. So, plug.
Well, Grant, great, yes. So go to Grant for CCD, Corporate Cultural Diplomacy, and build up those relationships in Asia and get plugged into the right networks with the right influence and the right level of reciprocity and long-term commitment. It's not just a short-term deal. Well, Grant, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate the time you've taken to do this. Just before I let you go, I have one final
Yes.
question. You live in Vietnam in a seaside town, I know that. What do you like about living there?
Oh, I love the beach, and the beach weather. It's beach weather every day. It's t-shirt weather every day. The
Fabulous.
food is delicious.
Yes.
And look, living in Vietnam, I'm at the heart of the action here in Asia. I can see the development happening from my doorstep, and it's an exciting time to live and work in Asia, and I love it.
Well, that's fantastic. Take advice from Grant. Dive in, literally, into the waves of Asia, and make sure that you're plugging into the action there. I'm sure that's really important insight into life in Asia that listeners will want to think about and reflect on. So that's it for today. I'd like to thank Grant for being my guest. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, David.
It's been a great pleasure and fun. And if you'd like to know more about corporate cultural diplomacy, please visit Grant's website at www.wherewordsfailblog.com. That's wherewordsfailblog.com, which is also there at the links below. And listen in to more news and views on doing business in Asia at Asia Business Network Expert Series, to which you can also subscribe on iTunes. So, until the next time, happy listening.